Life and death. We love talking about life. I mean, this podcast is called the Live Faith First podcast. We love living, we love life, but death is a reality that we all have to face at some point. This will all come to an end. Well, on this episode of the Live Faith First podcast, we talk to Abby Olcese and we navigate through the Lent season where we start with Ash Wednesday, which is kind of this beginning of a journey of realizing our humanity and how life is short and maybe we don't get it right all the time, and even look at some of the negative evils that are happening in the world, but also in light of God's love and grace and mercy and encouragement for us to go out and make a difference, to do better next year, but to also make a difference in our community. So Abby joins us. We're going to talk about the movie Annihilation. And so this is a great episode. Sit down and enjoy this episode of the Live Faith First podcast. We all respond to circumstances differently. Now, today, when you look around and you see fear and anxiety, it is through the roof. But you know what? There's also analytical people who choose to analyze and parse out what could happen and how that's going to affect us. And then you have people who they just embrace the situation. They see it for what it is and they move forward. Now, no matter the approach you take, there are some inevitabilities in life. Today, we're going to look at Ash Wednesday and how the church has historically approached life and death. And to help us on this journey of Jesus, and again, we're going to look at films here with film critic Abby Olcese. So Abby, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back.
Yeah, this is so awesome. We loved the Christmas and Advent series that we did, that I figured let's do this again. Let's bring Lent, let's bring Easter, let's bring Good Friday into this. So how have you been? Everything going all right?
Yeah, it's been a busy few weeks, months. I'm kind of enjoying having a little bit of downtime following a busy few weeks, but it's as you mentioned, we're coming up on Lent, which is one of my favorite seasons in the church year. So I'm excited to kind of get back into discussing in my book some of the specific stuff that's related to that, and also just kind of enjoying the season itself because I get a lot out of it.
Yeah. And for everybody out there who's listening, watching this, Abby's written a book and it goes through the Christian calendar. I'm not sure that we totally made that clear the time before, but there is a book. And so some of these might be new to you and your tradition, your Christian tradition, or maybe you're new to Christianity altogether. And what is this? So check out Abby's book. And I think it'd just be a great way to kind of journey through the Christian calendar. And so today we're going to look at Ash Wednesday. And I just got done admitting to Abby, I'm not an expert on Ash Wednesday. So Abby, we're looking to you today for this one. So what is Lent, and particularly what is Ash Wednesday? Tell us a little bit about those.
Yeah, so Ash Wednesday is kind of the day that kicks off Lent. It's the start of Lent, which is a 6-week period before leading up to Good Friday and Holy Week and Easter. That is just kind of it's a time of introspection and kind of consideration of our own sin, which makes it sound really heavy and guilty. And I mean, it can be, depending on how you approach it. A lot of people during Lent will take on a fast or some kind of discipline to kind of help them explore inwardly their own spiritual journey. Some people will give up certain things to kind of remind them of the sacrifice of Christ's death prior to his resurrection. And we kind of really get into the narrative of all that during Holy Week, but Lent is sort of the 6-week period following or preceding that, where we sort of get ready for it. And it all kicks off with Ash Wednesday, which is, I think, kind of a tone setter. So often on Ash Wednesday, you'll see people go to a special service at their church. And during that service, you usually will go up to the front and you will get ash put on either your forehead or your hands. It just depends. Basically, there are some churches that do both. There are some churches that only do one. And it's a reminder that, like, basically the person who is leading the service will tell you, you are dust and to dust you will return. So it's a reminder of our own mortality, basically. It's kind of an introduction to a season of kind of considering the fallenness of man and the fact that while God created this world, the people that inhabit this world are fallible and make mistakes, and sometimes really big systemic ones that cause a lot of pain for other people, and sometimes really small ones that just make our own lives more difficult. But in all ways, it ends like everything ends basically, and so it's a time to kind of reconsider where you're at in your life, figure out if this is where you want to be, where you would like to go, and to kind of consider all of that through the grace that God offers in Christ's death and resurrection. Which I know is kind of it's a long explanation, and it's kind of a lot to carry with you. But one of the reasons that I like Lent so much is that I'm a real big fan of drama, and just like in maybe not like an everyday like my life is dramatic sense, but I like it when bits of like narrative drama kind of creep their way into your everyday life. And Lent for me is a way that happens liturgically. It just happens naturally. And you end up thinking about a lot of stuff during Ash Wednesday and during Lent and during Holy Week that you don't really spend the rest of the year thinking about. And it's really nice to have a very elongated period of time where that's sort of the intent.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm struck by this because one, very countercultural. By that I mean we try to avoid. I try to avoid any kind of thought of my mortality. Now, the more years you put on your body, the more you realize, oh, things do change. Things do slow down. Things do hurt more than they used to. So you're kind of forced into it, but. It's really cool. The Christian calendar kind of sets this as part of the rhythm of our life, our year, kind of what that is. But I think the big piece to me, and maybe this comes more from my background, so you have to tell me how this meshes with kind of some more of the churches that spend more time celebrating Lent and recognizing Lent. But I'm still, as you're talking, I'm looking through the lens of grace on the other side of it. So it's one thing to say, oh, I messed up this year. I'm not where I want to be. I am truly falling short in this area. And that can be everything from guilt and shame ridden to maybe to the level of, anxiety and depression. Like, does God still love me anymore? But so can you talk a little bit about what this looks like in light of kind of the backdrop of grace? I mean, we're aiming towards Easter, which is a massive sun springing, right? Like life-giving event. And we're going to talk about that in a couple of weeks. But leading up to that, how does kind of grace and life interact during that 6-week Lent, or does it? Is that a personal thing? Like, kind of tell me a little bit about how that might work.
I mean, yeah, and it does. Again, it's going to vary by church, and it's going to vary by personal experience with Lent. I remember when I was a kid, I used to get really frustrated because like most of the kids in my like my Sunday school class might give up like soda or chocolate or like caffeine. Like those are like pretty common things that you could give up for Lent. I think in the Catholic tradition, people give up meat. And so that's why you have like specials of like fish on Fridays, basically. So that's kind of made its way into mainstream culture. But I never really understood why it was that you were just kind of denying yourself this. And I think part of it is just that it does serve as a helpful reminder of the season that you are in, and that you're supposed to be kind of redirecting your thoughts toward different stuff than you usually would think about. And so for that, it is kind of helpful. I think as I've gotten older, I have kind of understood, and I mean, you kind of mentioned this in your introduction, that we're in kind of a divided and anxious and really hard time for a lot of people. A lot of vulnerable populations who are just not sure what the future holds for them right now. I am a person of relative privilege in that I am a straight white person, and I don't really experience the same kind of oppression as a lot of people do. But I am close to friends who have that experience. I have people in my life who work with refugees and migrants who have that experience and can kind of inform me on that. And so Lent to me has become kind of a reminder of the difference between the earth that we live in and the kingdom of God, that earth is not the kingdom of God. And despite that, we have a responsibility to make it as close as we can for each other. Like, we have a responsibility to make the world good for each other. And at least particularly for me right now in this season of my life, and with the world being the way that it is, there are a lot of opportunities for me to remind myself of that and to engage with that in a way that is actually productive and helpful beyond just my own self. So that is kind of where I've ended up landing.
Yeah, I love
And
that.
I think even the kind of small and incremental victories that that land around that, I think for me are a form of reminder of the grace and love of God that exists.
Yeah,
That even in the
yeah,
darkness,
yeah,
there is this kind of persistent sense of justice and life and joy that is still there, that's waiting for you on the other side. So that
yeah,
to me is kind of what Lent has become, in a sense, if that makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah. No, that does. And yeah, spending a season kind of like, as you said a little bit ago, just kind of evaluating more than just ourselves. Obviously, I need to continue to evaluate myself more on a daily basis, probably, but
I mean, we all
annual
do,
is
yeah.
great, right?
Yeah, sure.
But even when you kind of look at how evil has integrated itself into the world and how that plays itself out in our communities, right? And kind of from the side of grace, what responsibility does that give us as followers of Jesus, as Christians, to go help in those places where there is evil, there is sin, there is brokenness,
Yeah.
there is fear, right? And how do we kind of step into that?
Yeah.
Does that encourage that,
I
or does it
think
like
so,
more sit on
yeah.
yourself? I mean, how does that go?
Yeah, no, I think that is encouraging. And it's also, I think, liturgically, there's an opportunity to kind of look back through kind of the history of God's people and see how all of the things that we're dealing with, while the specific circumstances themselves may be new, the idea of separation from God, of a broken relationship, and kind of constantly being given the choice to do the right thing and choosing
Hmm.
to do the other thing because the other thing is easier, even though it ends up leading to, regret later on. But that's a constant theme in the Bible. That's kind of the whole thing leading up to the death and resurrection of Christ. It's ingrained within Christ's own ministry, and so
Hmm.
it's I have found that the verses that we tend to focus on during Lent tend to look at that a lot. In the weeks leading up to Holy Week and Easter, there's also a lot of discussion of the Passover and the flight from Egypt, because the Last
Hmm.
Supper takes place during the Passover. And so those stories kind of end up overlapping over each other in different ways, in ways that are
Oh,
really
that's
interesting. You
cool.
see the people of Israel kind of reacting out of fear instead of out of trust, when they create something like, the golden calf, while they're waiting for Moses to come down from Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments. You see them being lost in the wilderness for just generations because they can't figure it out and they can't trust God the way that they need to. Um, and we see how that ends up kind of ossifying into just laws
Hmm.
and norms and fears that Jesus comes along and kind of disrupts and upsets and scares people as a result. And we kind of ultimately see where that leads. So there's the kind of narrative tension of that, balanced
Yeah,
with the
yeah.
thematic ideas of how does that reflect in our own lives? Where have we done things culturally, personally, communally that
Hmm.
are
Hmm.
similar to
Hmm.
that? How can we be aware of those things and try to live a better life as a result of what
Yeah.
we've learned?
Yeah. Yeah. So good. I love that. I love that. Well, I'd love to keep talking about Ash Wednesday, and we will, but there's also a film we want to talk about.
Oh yeah.
So we got Annihilation, Natalie Portman, Oscar Isaac, Tessa Thompson. Such a fun lineup. I love the group of actors in that movie. But walk us through that movie. It's
Sure.
fun. I'd seen it before, and it was one of those. My wife and I are watching it again, and we're like, well, this is familiar. Okay, we did watch this, right? And you don't
Yeah.
remember all the little pieces. So it's fun to go back to a movie you don't remember all the pieces to. So tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about Annihilation. Take us through that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it is, to be fair, kind of a wild and heavy movie. So there's a lot going on. So Annihilation it's based on, kind of loosely, on a novel by the author Jeff Vandermeer, and it takes place in Florida. There is an asteroid that has landed, and this kind of it's creative, like kind of a ripple effect, basically, that's called the shimmer. And so there's this big wall that's surrounding this asteroid that's fallen, and within that wall, everything is like, time is different, and everything within that wall has kind of mutated and changed. And so there have been groups of scientists that have gone into the shimmer to kind of figure out what's going on, and none of those groups have successfully returned. At the beginning of the movie, one person of one of the groups has returned, and that's Oscar Isaac's character Kane. His wife, Natalie Portman, is a researcher at Johns Hopkins. She studies cancer, and she's also former military, like her husband. And so when he comes back and has all of these really horrible adverse reactions to his time in the shimmer, she wants to figure out what's going on with him. So she joins an all-female team of scientists that are being sent in to figure out what's going on. So the film kind of follows the five of them, I think, if I'm remembering correctly.
I think originally it was.
Yeah,
we spent a
yeah.
lot of time with 4, but I think we actually went in with 5.
Yeah.
Yes.
And follows them as they try to figure out what happened to the previous expeditions, and if they can kind of get an answer to what is in the shimmer and why it behaves the way that it does. And all of the characters end up coming to kind of painful and horrible ends, one way or another.
And a variety of ends, right?
In a variety of ways.
Sprouting,
yes,
she's turning into a tree-ish something, right?
Yeah. One character transforms into a tree. Another character is attacked by these insane bears that have like skeleton faces. And then later, those bears, when they roar, it sounds like the dying screams of the person that they killed.
Yes,
there is
that was disturbing.
It's very disturbing. And yeah, and I know all of these things sound like why are you recommending this for Christian audiences? So here's the thing that I find really interesting about Annihilation is that it is a movie that is obsessed with death. It's and not just the idea that we will all die, but how we react to the idea that we are all going to die, and how we react to our own deaths in the face of when it comes time for us to pass. So there are characters whose last moments are really terrifying, and those moments are kind of imprinted on everybody else, and that becomes sort of the last memory that anybody ever has of that person. There are people who regard death as a changing of states, and the character that turns into a tree, Josie, is kind of emblematic of that, and her transformation is, I think, the most graceful and beautiful and peaceful of all of them, of what happens. It's kind of arguable what happens to Natalie Portman's character. We're not sure whether or not she actually makes it out, or whether she's been cloned and her clone made it out. So there's that. And it's there. All of this is to say that I think the movie is very interested in kind of how we regard the idea of our inevitable mortality, which is, I mean, it's very tied into the idea of Ash Wednesday, where we are reminded that our own bodies will fail us at some point, because we are ourselves, our own very selves, imperfect. So not only are we going to make mistakes, our body will make mistakes because it's designed that way. And I think it's important that Natalie Portman's character is a cancer researcher, because she is already kind of interested in the idea of changing states and metastasizing. And that is kind of what the shimmer itself is doing. As it grows, it changes and mutates everything in its path. And it grows the way that a tumor would grow. So there's all kinds of interesting ideas. There are several characters in the film whose lives have been touched by cancer. One character's daughter died from leukemia. Another character is sort of nearing the end stages of her battle with cancer, and so wants to kind of solve the problem of the shimmer before that disease takes over her complete identity and she is no longer the person she used to be. Natalie Portman's character as a scientist kind of wants to understand it and fight against it and solve it like it's a puzzle. There's all these kind of conflicting ideas that are sort of in conversation with each other. There are no easy answers in Annihilation, and I think that's kind of by design. Alex Garland, as a filmmaker, he also made Civil War, and Men, and I'm trying to remember what else, Ex Machina, all of which are movies that are really interested in questions about ideas and not so much the answers about those ideas. So he's very much trying to kind of introduce ideas that start a larger conversation, which I think the movie does very well.
Yeah. Well, and I do think people's approach to lots of things, we can pick it out, but let's just go for the ultimate here, since we're kind of talking about Ash Wednesday, but our death, right? And kind of how we navigate that reality. And I think probably for most of us, we spend a long part of our life ignoring it, pretending it's not coming anytime soon. And then when it does kind of break into our world, we, usually respond, which is normal, with, great grief, because it just doesn't make sense. But it's the inevitable that's always sitting out there. It's always going to happen. And I think, as you've already brought out, just people's response in that movie, where sometimes we want to just analyze it. Like, it just helps us. Like, can you just give me answers? Like, just, let me sit here, put all the puzzle pieces together. Like, that's, at least it's kind of distracting. Right. And then, the character, Dr. Visa,
Ventress,
something like that.
Yeah.
There we go. Her, it was just kind of like, this is my final trek. Like, she was resolved to the fact that I'm getting there, and I just want to get there. Like, I just want to get to the end of it, and kind of whatever happens. I think she probably had dreams she might be healed, but I don't, that was unclear.
Yeah.
But I do find Tessa Thompson's response kind of the most appealing.
Yes.
Where it was just this acceptance of, this is where I'm at. And she had already gone through loss her close friends, thought she might be getting her back, but instead it was this mutated bear skull thing.
Right. Yeah.
And we find so much. I mean, so her kind of ending in the movie there, that was the most kind of appealing and peaceful. And so I'm going to just kind of bring this around to us as Christians. This is my own personal opinion. I'll let you say whatever. Maybe you don't even want to talk about it, but that's all right. But I feel like as Christians, we spend a lot of time not wanting to get to heaven. Like, we spend a lot of time here, like, talking about heaven and accepting Jesus and doing things to honor him. But as we get closer to life, it's like we do everything we can to make sure we stay here as long as we can. And I get it. This is all we know. So, I mean, how can I not want to be, this is the world I know, and the other is unknown, and all of that. But, how does Ash Wednesday, our inevitability, how we handle it? Do you have any thoughts on this, or have I just gone too rogue in thoughts and we should just change it to something else?
No, not at all. I think you're right on. I think one of the reasons that Ash Wednesday is, I mean, anytime you talk about death, it's going to be heavy, but I think Ash Wednesday is itself an open question, and that is one of the reasons that I like it. It's also a reason that a lot of people don't like it, and why a lot of churches don't the kind of desire to kind of stay away from difficult stuff, especially if your own life is hard. But I think one of the things that makes Annihilation such an appealing tie-in to that part of the church year for me is that it itself is full of questions and full of kind of dualities. So, like, when the characters are in the Shimmer, a lot of it is mysterious, a lot of it is frightening, but a lot of it is really beautiful. Like, for every crocodile that has the teeth of a shark, there is like a deer that has really beautiful flowering antlers, or like a flowering trellis that has 3 or 4 different species of plants on it that shouldn't be able to exist in the same ecosystem. Like, anything is possible. And that, I think, kind of ties into what we were talking about Tessa Thompson's character, Josie, who we know has had a hard life outside of the expedition. She there's like some pretty serious suggestions that she has self-harmed in the past. And so her kind of experience with the deaths of all of these people around her has kind of helped her understand how to gracefully accept what is surely coming. I think she starts to notice that she's kind of slowly changing before anybody else does. And when she talks to Natalie Portman's character about it, she says that, some people want to fight against it. Some people want to understand it. Some people want to deny it completely, but I don't think I want any of that. And that's what she says right before she changes into this beautiful, like, human-shaped cluster of flowering vines. Which, I mean, technically it's death in that she is not the same form as she was, but it's also not, in the sense that, like, she's still, like, those flowers are alive. That vine is alive. She's just alive in a different form. And I think the thing that we fear the most, in the idea of death, is that we don't know what comes after. And I think it kind of feeds this real need for certainty in our own lives and in our faith as well. That at least in my experience, my most powerful experiences with faith have been open-ended and have been questioning. They've not been certain at all. And so I really like, I like the thornier parts of the church year that kind of make us confront the idea that in some situations there really are no answers until we get to the other side. And this is sort of the ultimate example of that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. And even while I was watching the movie, there was this part of me that was like, this could be kind of what the kingdom of God looks like.
Sure.
Like that idea that, like, we have a very set way that genes and genetics connect together and create everything from plants to humans to everything, right? Everything in between, right? Like, and it goes in a very orderly, kind of predictable way. Like, we know what is in DNA, and we know what gets activated, and who knows what that starts to look like. And we're getting better at understanding that the more we understand genetics.
Mm-hmm.
But to think of, like, a world where you're actually like, genes from different species are being connected together in unique and creative ways. I mean, there's a part of me that's like, this is going to be the adventure of the kingdom of God, hopefully minus the alligators with shark teeth,
Sure,
and,
yes.
Bears, but, a few of those items. We get that only on the earth, where we need to have something about to kill us, right?
Right.
But there was a piece of me that kind of longed for that, because it really was like, when you walk in nature now, I'm amazed whether you're in the forest or the ocean or wherever you are, at God's creativity, whether it's, walking along the coast and seeing beaches and stones and rocks and just that, or, whatever it might be. But to then have the wonder of, wonder what God's going to put together today. Like, I wonder what God, so there's a part of me that I was almost longing to be in that place, as if that was kind of our next heavenly, destination. And obviously I don't know what detail heaven is going to be like at all. But,
and I do think you see that reflected in scientists who are also Christians, that, I mean, a lot of it is kind of centered around creation care, but also, like, the love of that creativity, which in some ways can be kind of frightening, and sometimes can be really beautiful, and the sort of mutability of it as well, that you can't really put any of it into a box. So I think that's also a really interesting way of looking at it, that I think is ultimately really, joyful and life-giving. It just kind of requires you to confront some kind of scary ideas first. And I mean, that can be kind of uncomfortable, but I think the end result is ultimately worth the struggle that you have to put in on the front end.
Yeah. Yeah. And we know that to be true for just about everything in our lives. If you want something good to come out of it, there's usually a struggle to get there. So, so anyway, and yet we don't figure that out. Yeah, we try to take the easy path most of the time, right? Like, I'll get better, but it'll be some other way,
right? Because that's certain. Like, we know what the outcome is going to be, and even if it's not exactly what we want, it's close enough, right? So,
right, exactly. I'm going to bring it kind of back to the beginning a little bit here on Ash Wednesday, and just specifically to talk about the tension of living between grace and sin. And I think that's what challenges me in these seasons, where, we're going to walk through mortality. We're going to look at ways that we've fallen short. We're going to look at ways that society's falling short for people in it. There's a lot of areas when we kind of go on this 6-week journey that, aren't the way we would desire them to be. And I think we can confidently say not the way God would desire them to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so as you journey through, whether it's a personal, these are areas I need to work on, or social, these are things that we need to work on. How do you kind of navigate that tension of the reality of sin and evil and then grace, and like realizing that there's somehow God has been graceful, is going to work it all out. Like there's this end, which is beautiful and joyous, but the journey in between, we have to kind of sit in that. Any thoughts on how Ash Wednesday, again, here I go with these questions that I feel like, I don't know, maybe they're too big for you and me, Abby, but
I mean,
let's just take a stab at it. Right.
Listen, yeah, I mean, I want to start out by saying that, I mean, like everybody else, I'm not perfect at this. And also I'm not, I haven't gone to seminary, so a seminarian might have very different answers than I do. But
I have, and I'm still asking questions. So let's go.
Yeah, sure. So like, the way that I kind of structured it as I wrote the book, Films for All Seasons, and Annihilation is the Ash Wednesday entry in that section, is kind of a journey towards kind of coming to peace with yourself, and then kind of further out from that, understanding how you can use that sort of self-knowledge and self-acceptance to kind of help other people and make the world a little bit better, even though you yourself may have changed, but the world around you has not. So or largely has not. And I think being able to do the work of helping in a systemic and societal and like social justice kind of way, I think starts with the self. It starts with understanding that you are not perfect, that nobody is perfect. And that's why we have a relationship with God, because God is perfect and can help us in the ways that we fail. That to me is ultimately what the relationship of grace is about, is recognizing that we have certain weaknesses, that we have certain fears that as much as we try to address them are probably never really going to go away. We have certain prejudices that just exist within us culturally, that we have to unlearn. And sometimes those experiences are really bumpy, and sometimes they are never completely solved. And so you have to kind of, I think it's a lesson in humility first and foremost. And then learning to have grace with yourself, understanding that maybe you want to be in a different place than you currently are. And that requires you to do some work on yourself, and it requires you to accept the fact that God knows that, and God is helping you to get to that place. And then once you've kind of reached that spot that you can try, that you want to be more than what the world has made you to be or has told you that you can be, trying to find ways to make that true for you, and then seeing how you can kind of communicate that truth to other people, even in small ways, by making their lives a little easier. Whether that's spending time with somebody who is just really lonely and needs companionship, or trying to be an ally for refugees and immigrants in your community, or just kind of seeing a need and fulfilling that need, even if it's a really small one. It could be the person down the street. It could be like a mentorship program. It could be anything. And recognizing that there is fulfillment to be found in sharing that with other people, and kind of helping other people to kind of go on that journey themselves, even though in a larger sense, the change is probably going to be really small, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I think that's so good. I mean, when you say humble, that kind of realization that we don't have it all together, but it doesn't affect God's love for us.
Yeah.
It doesn't affect his care for us. It doesn't affect whether or not he likes us, whether or not he loves us, I don't think they're driven by my behavior. I really don't. Now, that doesn't mean I'm saying that he's always happy with what I do. That's not what I'm saying, right? On the other hand, his love for me doesn't change as I mess up. And I think that's why grace can empower us to step into some of these things that you're talking about.
Absolutely.
It can empower us to go help other people in our own inability to get it right all the time. I'm not an expert in this, but I can I'm a little further down the road than you, so let me help you out,
Yeah,
right? That
and
kind of
like
thing.
I'm
So
a 3 on the Enneagram with a 4 wing, and so like getting it right and having other people see that I got it right is really important to me. So for me at least, Lent is kind of it's a really nice reminder that you're not going to get it right all the time, and that's okay. And even if nobody sees what you're doing, God sees what you're
mm,
doing and appreciates the effort and is there to help you on your way, and that is okay too.
yeah.
So that's that. I think that's another part of Lent for me, is kind of recognizing that there's. I mean, it's not necessarily wrong to want validation, but I think if you want it too much, there can be some traps of sin in there, and it's good to pay attention to those.
Yes, absolutely right. Absolutely right. All right, Abby. Well, once again, I think we've wandered through all kinds of great stuff today around Ash Wednesday, annihilation, our own demise, our own deaths, and then how we live well in this world now. So, all right, Abby, we're going to do this again for Good Friday. All right. So if you're watching this, come back on Good Friday. We're going to continue this conversation. But for us today, why don't we all go out and let's live faith first? Hey, you're still here. That's awesome. That means you really enjoyed the episode with Abby talking about Ash Wednesday and Lent, as well as a movie, Annihilation. One of the things that's standing out to me in this latest episode is that in the middle of the Christian calendar, here we are in March, we have an opportunity to stop and kind of realize our own mortality, but not in order to be morbid or mourn the fact that, someday all of this is going to come to an end, but rather to be encouraged with God's grace and mercy and love, that those places of brokenness within us, those places of brokenness in our society, that we can go in and make a difference there. So here's what I'd love to hear from you. What's something you can do during this Lenten season to bridge divides? Maybe there's some brokenness in you that you want to spend some time on. Do it. Get after it. You got 40 days to try to bring some healing to yourself. And of course, it can go past Easter. Or maybe there's something in your community, or maybe there's a relationship that broke during an election season or some other thing that happened in your life. So what I'd like to know is, what do you want to do during this Lent season to bring some healing to yourself, or maybe healing to your community and to the people around you, maybe to people in your own family? All right, everybody, let's go out today and live faith first.